My name is Ben Sherman. I'm the owner of GTS Classic Motors, and I've been in the car business literally all of my life. While new cars are fun and they get us where we need to go, my true passion has always been vintage Shelbys and Mustangs. I'm excited to announce a 5-part video series whereupon we'll be reviewing at length vintage Mustangs and Shelbys from years past. And for our inaugural episode today, we're going to be not only reviewing and doing a walk around, but also test driving an original 1965 Shelby GT350, similar to this one sitting right here. If you've ever wanted to go on a test drive in a 65 Shelby GT350, buckle up and hang on, because we're going now. So it's 1964 and a half. Lee Iacocca and Ford Motor Company have just come out with what would be their biggest hit ever, the 1964 and a half Mustang. And while it was a great car in stock form, it really lacked the fire-breathing, racy image that so many people coveted at the time. Enter Carroll Shelby, who's already in a relationship with Ford. To homologate the Mustang for SCCA racing, they were required to build 100 Shelby GT350s. Carroll took the Mustang, actually 562 of them, from San Jose. They were all fastbacks, and developed what would be one of the most iconic cars and brands in history. You know, Carroll Shelby would go on to build Shelbys for years. However, the 65 really had his direct involvement. And it's really the most modified of the vintage Shelbys between 1965 and 1970. So a 65 Shelby had modifications performed at Shelby American that none of the other cars had, other than a few carryover cars in 1966. To be specific, Shelby actually lowered the front suspension for better geometry in racing and installed overrider traction bars in a crude fashion by hacking through the floor and welding mounts in. The overrider bars and the modifications to lower the front suspension proved costly for Shelby, and so in later years, consequently, he decided to keep the cars more stock. Of course, the 65 Shelby had the 389 locking Detroit locker rear end. If you've never driven one, and you will be shortly, you'll find out that going around a corner can be arduous, particularly at low speed. The 65 Shelby was really a brute, and quite frankly, it was a car that will never be built again. The cars were purpose-built and designed to drive off the showroom floor and be raced. In fact, out of the 562 1965 Shelby GT350s built, 36 were what they call an R model. The R model stood for racing, and of course, you could buy an R model, take it off the showroom floor, and go win races over the weekend. It was an incredible time. The 289 that Carroll Shelby used in the 1965 Shelbys effectively was the hypo engine that Ford created. It was a solid lifter, 4-barrel carburetor engine. It produced 271 horsepower, and it was a screamer. You can rev this engine all day long, 7,000 RPM even, and it's bulletproof. But that wasn't good enough for Carroll. He decided to make his own modifications to the engine, including a freer breathing exhaust system, tri-wide headers, a high-rise aluminum intake manifold, deep sump oil pan, different carburetor, the 715 CFM made by Holley. After Carroll was done putting his touch on the cars, they now produce 306 horsepower. A little known fact about the K-Code engine is Ford was having a lot of warranty issues. Guys bought these cars and raced them, whether they were in a Shelby or even in a hypo Mustang. So Ford started VIN stamping its Ford VIN under the #1 cylinder plug of the block. This way they could keep track of these engines in the event of warranty issues. And of course, it was only a 6-month warranty if you bought the hypo. To find original 65 Shelbys with their matching numbers block is very rare. Creature comforts. Well, you don't want a 65 Shelby if you're looking for those. So the idea of this car, again, was racing. Racing, racing, racing. With that said, the interior of the car had to be a 2-seat interior. Shelby took out the rear seat, developed a fiberglass package tray whereupon the spare tire would sit as well, rendering the car a true sports car with just 2 seats. There was no power brakes, there were no power steering. The car is very basic, but it was designed for one purpose: road feel, handling. I mean, driving a 65 Shelby is unlike any other car on the planet. It's raw. You're not messing around on your cell phone. There's no sipping a latte when you're driving the car. The car requires you to truly be engaged when driving it. So the first 100 cars were effectively hand-built by Carroll Shelby and his team. They were learning as they built these cars, kind of as they went. And with that said, there were a lot of production changes, even though it was a very low number of cars built, 562 as I've mentioned, that occurred. And so some of these changes were due to financial issues. Some of them were due to production time. Some of them were complaints driven by consumers who would actually purchase the cars. So a few of these running production changes would include the trunk-mounted battery, which actually was a great weight balancing effort by Shelby and his team. I believe that the number was somewhere around a 10 or 15% weight redistribution, which is great for racing. Of course, you're looking for a 50-50 distribution of weight. But what they found, of course, it was costly for Shelby to run the cables and effectively change and reroute the battery. But that aside, they were having a lot of problems with fumes getting into the cabin of the car. These were not sealed batteries that we have today on modern cars. They were having problems with the acid leaking out of the batteries, and they tried some remedies with that, with different caps and tubes that would try to drain out of the trunk area. And eventually, after the first third of the cars were built or so, they decided to put the battery back in the bonnet of the car, or under the hood, I should say, and that's where they left it for the remainder of the production. Some other changes that were made during production run included an issue with the rear overrider traction bars. These were crudely installed. I've looked at several of my cars, and it looks like someone took a sawzall to it, and that's really kind of how they did it, and then welded in the mounts into the floor. The problem was you have a free-flowing exhaust system effectively just ahead of these areas, and exhaust was getting into the cabin of the vehicle. It was a dangerous situation. It was outlined in several of the initial magazine test drives of the period, and so their idea to fix that at first was just some rubber that was crudely pop riveted around these areas to try to keep both moisture, inclement weather, and exhaust fumes out of the cabin. They later designed a fiberglass box, if you will, that would sit down over this area to try to, again, keep the exhaust fumes out of the cabin of the car. So those were some running production changes. The steering wheel originally was a 16-inch design, and then they moved that to a 15-inch design. The wheels were built by Moto-Lita. They're a beautiful wheel on a Shelby. If you've never seen one, probably one of the most handsome steering wheels, if you can call a steering wheel handsome, at least in my opinion, built. So yeah, there were a lot of changes. A couple little known facts too, mentioning exhaust. A lot of people don't realize this, but not all Shelbys, 65 GT350s specifically, had the side exiting exhaust, which is kind of an iconic look, and sound, of course, which we'll see shortly. Because cars that went to New York, like my father's 65 Shelby, and also cars that went to California, they had laws that didn't allow side pipes like that without mufflers. And so Shelby simply just kept the original K-code exhaust system on the car and shipped it that way. It was noted as special exhaust, one of really three options available for the car. Special exhaust, which would have been the K-code dual rear exiting exhaust. And then, of course, stripes, the Le Mans stripes, were an option on the cars. Most, I shouldn't say most, but many 65 Shelbys did not have the Le Mans stripes from the factory. And then the final option was the addition of the Shelby Krager wheels, which are an iconic, beautiful wheel, but most people don't realize the majority of Shelbys, or a great deal of them, I should say, came with just a standard steel wheel. So again, it's interesting on such a low production run of cars, how many running production changes were made throughout that year when they built these cars. So you're ready to buy a 65 Shelby. It's an incredible experience, and there's not a lot of cars available. Rumoredly, there's around 400 left accounted for of the original 562. It can be a daunting experience, and so I tell everyone to start first with SAC, the Shelby American Automobile Club, and I've got a copy of 65 registry right here. This one's still in the package. I keep my other one in my vehicle at all times. But basically what SAC does is they keep track of these cars and have been doing so really since the car's inception. Shelby's, particularly 65s and 66s, are very unique because they weren't tracked by Kevin Marty or the Marty reports that you hear about with 67s, 8s, and 9s, which offer a lot more documentation. These cars really are unique in that they've only been kept track of by SAC. And so, little known fact about 65 Shelbys is they have 2 VIN numbers on them, so do 66s. And the idea is when the car was produced at the San Jose plant, it had its original Ford VIN number stamped in 3 places under the inner fender aprons. The cars then went to Shelby, and he rebadged and riveted on the Shelby VIN, the SFM number, Shelby Ford Mustang. So, you know, the car we're driving today, it's in the 300 series, so it's about a mid-production car. So it has some of the nuances from the beginning cars and some from the ending cars. And with that said, you know, you want to make sure that the car is as authentic as possible. And by contacting SAC, they can match the hidden Ford VIN to the correlating VIN number on your Shelby tag and tell you if it's a real Shelby or not. I always encourage people to, particularly if it's a first-time buyer, you know, enlist the help of an expert. There's some wonderful people. Many of these people have helped even me over the years that know a lot about 65 Shelbys. They can be a tricky car to buy, and of course, as these cars have climbed in value, you know, back in the 90s, these were a $50,000, $60,000 car. These cars now bring, and I'm not even speaking of R models, I'm talking about just street models, you know, between $500,000 and $600,000 nowadays. So as the market continues to climb, as does the appeal to someone nefarious to clone a car, and you certainly don't want to buy a clone. I think the appeal of a 65 Shelby is really, I think any astute collector, irrespective of whether they collect Ferraris, Mercedes, exotic cars, newer cars, the history of a 65 Shelby, given that it was the first time it was ever built, the low number of production cars ever made, and the fact that Carroll was really involved with that car, as opposed to as the cars went on, you know, by 1968, A.O. Smith had taken over production of Shelbys, Ford was more involved, and Carroll had really washed his hands with it all. I think having a 65 Shelby in your collection is almost a must. And of course, they're all white. There's a great quote in the most recent registry by a gentleman named Robert Ross. He says, like baby penguins, they all look the same except to their mom and dad. And so I just think there's a mystique about owning one, and they're just a really awesome car. They look great, they sound great, and they're raw. There's something guttural about the car, particularly when you're driving one.
And of course, this car has the Shelby Crater Super Sport wheels. So, really cool example. We're going to take this for a ride, hopefully not throw any of the cameras off, and let's have some fun. So we're inside the cabin. Again, pretty basic in here. Got your steering wheel, no power steering, no power brakes. This particular car, being a street model, has the gauge pod up here, which has its original, this particular car has its original Shelby tachometer, and then of course you had an oil pressure gauge as well. The horn, because of the wheel being replaced by Carroll, was relocated to this switch here. And other than that, it's Mustang 101 in here. 1965, let's go for a spin. Particularly with the windows down. You know, people ask me, what's it like driving one of these? I've driven a lot of regular Mustangs over the years, but the Shelby, particularly with the lowered front suspension, the blue dot tires, the larger 15-inch wheels, and then the improvements made to the drivetrain, really create an experience different than a vintage Mustang. The car handles much, much better. Really, this car could pass off from a handling standpoint as an 80s or 90s car. So the car was really ahead of its time after Carroll and his team went through and modified them. From a small block standpoint for this car.